Shalom Aleichem, welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Publishing and Public Programs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, which is presented in partnership with Brama Talks, the webinar series of the Grodzka Gate NN Theater Center, Lublin, Poland. A quick note before I turn over the mic to today's host, Liora Tech. Please note that your video and audio will be off throughout the program. You may send us your questions via the question panel, which in most instances is located at the bottom right of your screen. We ask that you keep questions short and that you refrain from sending us comments so that we can try to get to all of the questions today. And rest assured, if you send us a question that we're not able to address or needs additional attention, we will get back to you following the program. Thanks for joining us. And now over to our host, Liora.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Welcome, Seid begrüßt, Vitami. My name is Liora Tech, and I'm the Special Projects Partner of the Grodzka Gate NN Theater Center, as Lisa said, or in Polish, Brama Grodzka, Teatr NN. And we'll talk a little bit more about that organization in a minute. We're meeting today for a very exciting reason to talk about this beautiful book, The Glass Plates of Lublin, which was published by the Yiddish Book Center's White Goat Press using images from a collection of glass negatives from Lublin that are housed at Brama Grodzka. And they are from between 1913 and 1930. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that we're going to be talking about this lost world of Lublin from 100 years ago. And we wanted to acknowledge that as we're talking, there is a cruel war being waged upon the Ukrainian people who in the past few weeks have lost their world. And our thoughts are with them. Now I'd like to explain to those of you who are unfamiliar with the Grodzka Gate or Brama Grodzka, you'll find that we kind of use the English and the Polish names of our institution back and forth. I'd like to explain to you a little bit about what this institution is. Brama Grodzka in Polish literally means, Brama is gate, so it's like an archway, and Grodzka is town. So it's one of the gates in the old town of Lublin. It was also called at one time Brama Żydowska, the Jewish gate. Because it turns out that it was the dividing line or the passageway between the Jewish and Christian parts of Lublin for several hundred years. The founder and director of the institution, the Grodzka Gate NN Theater Center, Tomek Pietraszewicz, was planning to start a theater company in this space, but when he discovered the history and he realized that there were so many people in Lublin that didn't know about its Jewish past, that didn't remember the 43,000 Jews that lived in Lublin before the war, he changed his mind about the theater company and decided to create an organization that was dedicated to remembering the Jews of Lublin. And Brama Grodzka has grown a lot since the 1990s when he did that after the fall of communism, but there is still that commitment to the remembrance of Lublin's Jews. So that gives you a little bit of background. And before I invite our distinguished panel in, we're going to see a short film that will give you a sense of these amazing images that are included in the book, The Glass Plates of Lublin. So don't worry if the film doesn't start for a couple of seconds, it is coming, and I'll see you on the other side.
In the winter of 2010, Krzysztof Janus, an engineer and specialist in monument conservation, was going through the attic of Rynek 4, a 19th century tenement house in Lublin, when he came upon something astonishing. He and his renovation team found, lying in a pile of trash, almost 3,000 glass plate negatives, each measuring just under 6 by 4 inches. From the dirty and sometimes broken glass tiles emerged the faces of Poles and Jews, men and women, children and the elderly, workers distracted from work, young couples flirting, dignitaries bursting through tailcoats, and above all else, ordinary anonymous people who never dreamed their portraits would one day be of interest to anyone. This unique collection, which has been exhibited at Lublin's Grodzka Gate NN Theatre Center since 2012, was incredibly fortunate. For nearly 80 years, it was kept in extremely unfavorable conditions. A humid attic only partially protected from rain, snow and frost, freezing in the winter and boiling hot in the summer. Despite this, only some of them are washed out, broken or show signs of corrosion, and the vast majority have survived in surprisingly good condition. In the decades since this remarkable find, the collection has been thoroughly researched and analyzed. It has inspired artists and became the subject of a documentary. Yet these 3,000 glass negatives still hold many secrets. To begin with, who took these pictures? Some scholars speculated that they were made by one of Lublin's Jewish photographers, as suggested by a few handwritten signatures in Yiddish. But no connection could be made between any known photographer and the address where the negatives were found. In 2015, Jakub Chmielewski, a researcher at the State Museum at Majdanek, discovered a new clue. In German documents from August 1940, he found an entry on the house at Rynek 4, along with the name Abram Zilber Bear and the annotation photographer. Chmielewski's discovery was the first and still the only serious indication of the negative's authorship. Unfortunately, details about Zilberberg's life remain fairly unknown, and he speaks to us only through his works. It is the early 20th century Lublin that is the main subject of the glass plates from Rynek 4. Although the images are in most cases portraits and do not offer a particularly broad perspective, Zilberberg's photographs tell us a lot about the diversity of the city and its Jewish community. In them, we see signs of different political parties and members of various social classes. Several dozen photos chronicle the construction and opening of Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin, soon to be the largest yeshiva or Talmudic academy in the world, while in others we see groups of left-wing and secular Jewish youngsters, such as members of Bund-affiliated youth groups. The images show the changes in pre-war fashion, which reflect increasing Jewish secularization. Many of the pictures were taken in the Saxon Garden, Lublin's Central Park, and the nearby villages and towns where Lublin residents used to go for vacation. In others, we look into apartments and see potted flowers, pets, the intimacy of a homey mess, and the ephemeral details of interior design. We also see poverty, a bit powdered and sometimes smiling, but emerging from dirty nails, bare feet, faces twisted by hunger and disease, and eyes that look painfully into the future, searching for hope and a change of fate. Many of the glass plates seem to be unsuccessful takes, overexposed or underexposed, blurry and inaccurately framed, as if they were rejected shots that had never been printed. There is little artistry in them, but it is their honesty that makes them powerful. In its totality, the collection is a unique portrait of pre-war Lublin, destroyed and lost during the Second World War. We watch it with interest, and it looks back at us with the living, hypnotic eyes of its former inhabitants, whose joys and sorrows were preserved on glass.
And now I'd like to invite our three panelists to join us. Aaron Lansky, founder and president of the Yiddish Book Center. Lisa Newman, the director of publishing and public programs of the center. And Piotr Nazaruk, whose voice you just heard, who is a researcher, educator, and curator at Brama Grodzka, Teatr NN. Welcome to all of you. I'd like to begin by asking all of you, and maybe we'll start with Aaron, what was your first meeting with these images like? Because I think you all have a different story.
Sure. Well, in 2018, my wife and I and a close friend of ours, Lisa Kassa, went to Poland for the opening of a film on the Oynik Shabbos, the hiding of documents in Warsaw. So we were already sort of in this mode of finding lost things. And we, in turn, went on to try to track down the origins of a manuscript, the first known manuscript by Isaac Bashevis Singer that had surfaced in Bilingual, and we were being brought there by Professor Monika Adamczyk-Garbowska. While we were waiting for Monika, she had arranged for someone to give us a tour of Old Lublin, and we ended up at the Brama Grodzka. We had no clue where we were. We walk into this dark labyrinthine building, and we're brought upstairs, and we start to see just under the soffit of the ceiling, we start to see these glass plates there. And I have to tell you, they took my breath away. And the same for Lisa, who was a professional photographer, Lisa Kassa, who was a professional photographer, my wife. We were blown away by their obvious, just the impact of them, and by their obvious historical and ethnographic possibilities as well.
And did you, I think that the idea for the book was from Lisa Newman, right? Did you have any inkling of, that you would put these images together before Lisa brought that up to you?
The second I saw them, I knew something had to be done. I couldn't believe it. I was seeing one of the great treasures of Jewish historical documentation. And I've spent the last 42 years of my life chasing down old Yiddish books and looking for Jewish treasures. And I never had the slightest inkling that these existed. So of course, just by nature, by instinct, my first sense was, wow, I hope more people can get to see these. How that was going to happen, that took Lisa to figure out.
Yeah, I think that in your introduction, or in your bio, there's a quote about the Yiddish Book Center as dealing with cultural rescue, and I think that's something that the two institutions have in common. That Brama Grodzka is doing that as well. So, Lisa, tell us about your encounter with these images.
So, in my role as public programs, I get screeners all the time from film distributors to see if we want to show them. And I think it was 2019, Go To Films just sent me a list of what they had. And this was the documentary about the glass plates was one of the selections. And I thought that sounds interesting. And I watched it, with colleague and friend David Mazauer, also co-editor with Aaron and me of Pakenträger. And as soon as the film was over, I said, that needs to be a book. Those are incredible. And so David had known about them as well. I think Piotr, you knew one another. So it was all three of us sort of came to these at different points in time, but I think the reaction was all the same. So when I had the opportunity to suggest it to Aaron, it didn't take more than a second for him to say, give it a green light.
Well, we're certainly glad that you did. It's a beautiful book. So Piotr, tell us about when you first saw these images.
I worked at Brama Grodzka, I think, since 2015, and the collection was discovered in 2010. So when I came here, the glass plates were here, all over the place, and from what I remember, like back then in 2015, we were still like uncertain who the photographer was. Like we had no clue about the name of the authorship and the name of the photographer, and it was like a big deal. Like I remember, I was working on a website about the history of Lublin Jews, but this collection was something that was like, still it is like those of you who have visited Grodzka Gate know that this collection like binds all the rooms together, like it's exhibited everywhere. But also then it was something that was, you know, always behind us, behind the scenes. It was much bigger mystery than it is today. And almost like instantly, I think, like I was amazed by this collection. So like that's my story with like my beginnings with this collection. And maybe actually, you know, it's important to note that although this collection was discovered in 2010, it was donated to Brama Grodzka or Grodzka Gate in 2012, which was exactly 10 years ago. So this year marks the 10th anniversary of like Brama Grodzka's, what's the term, curatorship over the collection. And, you know, like I can't imagine a better way to celebrate this 10th anniversary than publishing this book. So I would like to, you know, officially express our gratitude to the Yiddish Book Center for publishing it and bringing it to the world. So.
It sounds like it was a very fruitful partnership or for a cooperation for everyone. I'm curious about how you chose the images that were going to go into the book. You know, there were 2,700, I think. Is that right, altogether? But how many are in the book, first of all?
160.
Okay, so what was that process like? Let our audience be a fly on the wall in those discussions.
Do you want me to take this one? Okay, and join in, Piotr. I got from Piotr a file of 2,700 high-res negatives that were huge. First, it took a lot of effort to download them. We worked back and forth together and went through them with the designer of the book, Michael Grinley, and we flagged several, and we looked at them in different categories. We ended up looking at them at least 4 times, which is a lot of viewing to whittle them down. And we went back and forth with Piotr about which ones we were selecting. He weighed in on which ones he felt he wanted in there. And there was a lot of back and forth, then showing them to Aaron as well. So it was a long editing process and really hard.
But you told me, I think, Lisa, that you each had some favorites that you definitely wanted in there.
Yes.
So does anybody want to talk about which their favorites were and why?
Well, maybe I will add that, you know, it's not easy to go through 2,700 photographs and make a selection. Like, you know, a lot of work had to be done. But maybe it's also important to note that I think, like, I hope Lisa and Aaron can confirm my words. Like, we had so much fun also working on this book. Like, you know, we all like work somewhere, or we study, or we do whatever we do, and even, you know, in our daily activities, there are some necessary things they have to be done, but are not necessarily like super interesting, or actually dull and boring. But this project gave us, you know, this opportunity to make something like uplifting, something that gave us joy. And I hope you will be able to like feel maybe this excitement in the book, like those of you who will buy it, who will have the opportunity to have it. You know, all of us probably have some like favorites, because when you have such a huge collection of images, and they are like, most of them are images, like portrait images, you almost instantly develop some kind of connection between the faces you see. Like, you either like guess whoever this person might have been, or you make it up somehow, but you develop this connection. So it's normal, I think, even from biological perspective and the construction of our minds, that we have our favorites. Like when I was working on this book, I had this I don't know, feeling of going through some kind of pre-war, I don't know, like Facebook or a dating service even, you know, like thousands of faces, some of them quite attractive, some interesting from different perspectives, from different reasons. Like, I don't know, like I can tell you something about some specific photos that are interesting from my perspective, but the collection as a collection in its totality is what I find the most interesting.
So Aaron, can I ask you about, because in the film narration, Piotr mentioned that there are Jews and non-Jews, Jewish pictures. How did you think about that? Like, your work at the Yiddish Book Center is preserving Jewish texts, right? Like, did it matter? You know, did you want to know who these people were? What?
Well, of course we wanted to know who they were, but I have to say, after Lisa can vouch for this, maybe after 15 minutes, Lisa, we kind of gave up on trying to guess who's Jewish and who's not Jewish. That's one of the favorite games in my house with my kids, but in this case, it was impossible to know. And actually what was so striking was how different these people looked from the stereotypical images of Jews of that period. You know, most of us know the work of some of the great photographers like Roman Vishniak, who went later in the 30s to document Polish Jews. But when he was doing that, he had an agenda. He was trying to find images of, you know, religious Jews who looked like Jews had looked before. He worked very, very hard to make sure no telephone wires were in the picture and to make sure no automobiles were driving by when he shot this. And he was creating a kind of old-fashioned world. But the truth was that world didn't really exist by that point, or it certainly wasn't the mainstream. What's so remarkable about these photographs, I agree with Piotr that there's no artistry in them, in the sense that I think they're artistically virtuosic in many ways, but that wasn't the intent of the photographs. But there's also no artifice in the photographs. There's no shtick, there's no agenda, there's no preconception. This was a working photographer just taking pictures. And precisely for that reason, they offer a kind of candor that we're no longer able to access from that period. These are not stereotypical images. These are just the way people actually looked and where they actually lived. Can I add just one other thing, Leora? Some years ago, many years ago now, I heard the great anthropologist Margaret Mead speak. And when she was very young, she had gone to the South Pacific and to Samoa, and she, you know, did a lot of work. She had an old camera with her at the time, I think a Leica, and she was taking photographs everywhere she went. And when I heard her speak, maybe in the 1970s, she said, you know, I went back recently and I looked at all my photographs from Samoa. And she said, what was so striking about them is that the things I was photographing, the subjects I thought I was photographing, they're not that interesting now. What's really interesting is what was inadvertently behind them in the photographs, or things that just happened to be in the frame that now, in light of subsequent events, look astonishing to us, or totally different to us. These photographs in their entirety have that quality. Everything about them tells us something different about a world that we thought we knew but didn't really fully understand.
Yeah, and as you mentioned in the narration, Piotr, they show some change over that period of time, right, from 1913 to 1930. What kinds of things are you talking about, like the way people dressed, or?
The way people dressed, the way people looked like, the way, like, the city of Lublin is not like the main hero of the collection. Like, you can, like in some cases, you can see some buildings, some fragments of streets. And also there you can notice some changes, but let's remember that if this collection, let's say, starts in 1913, so still Lublin is still in Russian Empire, and the last photos from this collection are from the period when the independent Polish state is like fully developed and actually preparing to the clash of huge ideologies that took over in the late 1930s. But so it's a long period of time, and you can see such changes, like to be specific, with I don't know, like hats, with dresses. People were in the photos.
Did you try to determine what year they were from?
No, I don't feel like a specialist in the history of fashion. I can only guess. Like, it would be actually a nice research project, I think, for someone who's like, there are like for sure people who are doing such research, and they can, you know, see very interesting details we are unable to because we don't have, like, we don't know enough.
Right. Well, now that there's a book, you know, maybe that will grab someone's attention. Lisa, I wanted to ask you some like specific things about the actual book, like this vellum cover, which I really like. And I'm just curious if this was your thinking about it, because it's sort of like, you know, we can't really access this world. Like, we can sort of see it, but it's actually never going to be entirely clear. I don't know if that's what the idea was.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the thinking. And thanks to a very last minute effort, we were able to put that on the cover. And it also allowed for us to take the type off of the photograph that's on the cover, which also felt really important. These pictures, you know, when you spend as much time, you know, going through the 2,700, and I can imagine for you, Piotr, it's even more amazing. But it was a couple of months of living with them, and you really feel some connection to them, a deep connection to them, and you want to honor them. And sometimes it's really hard to put type on top of them. So the idea of the vellum cover had a couple of different sort of rationales, but yours is spot on.
So is that the same reason why there are no page numbers?
Yeah, there's no page. Yeah, very bad English. Sorry. There are no page numbers intentionally, because again, it would take away from it. And there's no reason, because you wouldn't be referring to them necessarily. So that was a decision that was made along the way. We needed them in the beginning because all of the back and forth with Pietro, we needed to refer to which pages we were talking about for captions and things like that.
Right.
You know,
I'm also curious. Oh, go ahead.
No, Larry, I just want to say that for all the quotidian content of these, the kind of, you know, chronicle of everyday life, viewed in retrospect, for me at least, there's something also rather sacred about these pictures, in that they are what remains of that world. I find it so haunting. Every time I just looked at the pictures again this morning, and I'm always struck by the same thing. There were these women look up who were so stunningly beautiful. There were children playing. There are, you know, men in the fire brigade sitting there with such extraordinary dignity and pride. And I look at all of these people, and I realize that almost nobody in this book, if anyone, survived the Holocaust. You know, these people died. And that's even harder to take, because then we realize, once again, it wasn't mass graves and mass victims in the kind of way we're used to thinking of these people. These were individuals living full lives, every bit as modern in our own lives, and then they were killed. And that makes it 1,000 times more painful and more poignant.
And I think that poignancy really comes out when you see the images that have the corrosion on them. You know, to me, that really like. Another thing that I noticed was that the introduction by Piotr is also, it's in English, and then it's in Polish, and then in the back there are some captions for some of the photos, and you provide the Polish translation. So who wants to tell me about how that came about? You know, was that,
if I may, actually I wanted to comment on this, because it's not 100% bilingual. Like, there are like some fragments in the book that are only in English, but let's say like most of it is bilingual. And I think that, like, by all means, this Polish layer of this book is actually unnecessary. Like, you know, it was published in the United States. We aim for English-speaking audience. It's like it generates costs, I believe, like maybe not huge costs, but you know, you have to print additional pages, like you have to set them, design them, and so on. But, and this is a huge but, and sorry if I'm like mispronouncing this word, it's not intentional. Like, you know, the Yiddish Book Center is unnecessary. Like, the world can exist without the Yiddish Book Center and can exist without Grodzka Gate. Like, you know, from, I know, like the global economy can survive without how many 1.5 million Yiddish books saved and preserved and digitized, and thousands of oral testimonies my colleagues here have recorded. But you know how much more beautiful the world is thanks to all those unnecessary activities and undertakings by the Yiddish Book Center, by the Grodzka Gate, and many other institutions around the world. And that's the case also with this Polish layer of the glass plates of Lublin. Like, you know, this book can exist without it, but it's a like embodiment of the best traditions of cooperation and values that make our lives and our world like less annoying and a bit more interesting and beautiful. So, like, I'm not sure whether that was the decision to make this book bilingual, but for me, it's something that is simply beautiful. Like, I love the fact that it is both in English and in Polish.
Was there any consideration or thought to have it also in Yiddish?
Of course, but we couldn't afford it.
Oh, okay.
There was a limit to how much we could do. So when I got married, we'd had our wedding invitation in English, Hebrew, and Yiddish, and it got so long at that point. So with this one, we decided to cut back a little bit. But Piotr, I just want to say there was another consideration for us in deciding to put the Polish there, and that was we feel such an enormous sense of gratitude towards you and towards your colleagues. What you have done is heroic, and you have saved one of the great Jewish treasures, and we can never thank you enough for that. So you've earned the Polish in this book.
Thank you.
One really cool thing that's happened is that several people have recognized relatives in this collection. And Piotr, I would love if you could tell us one or two of those stories.
Well, first of all, a couple of months ago, I think it was in October, we produced, like with the Yiddish Book Center, we produced a webinar about this collection. Like you can probably find a link, and like I'm sitting there and I'm giving like a detailed history of this collection. And like just, I don't know, like a few days before that webinar, Shelley Capozzi, who's actually, she works closely with Brama Grodzka here with us. She contacted me because she saw one of the pictures from the glass negatives collection that was used by the Yiddish Book Center to advertise, to promote this webinar, and she recognized this photo. She had a very similar, well, the same copy of the photo at her home, and amazingly enough, it's the only surviving photo of one of her aunts. The problem is she doesn't know the name of her aunt, but there were some other people who recognized their relatives like, for example, Róża Fischmann-Schneidman, who was she was a journalist. She survived the Holocaust in Russia, and she after the war she was a journalist in Lublin, and she penned a Yiddish memoir in the 90s, I think, or in the 80s. So her daughter recognized her in one of the photos, and this photo is also in the book. But our another colleague from Antwerp, Jackie Schwartz, who's a researcher, like she's very experienced in archival work, and at some point she contacted us, and because she was going through some records of emigration from Lublin to Antwerp, or from Lublin through Antwerp and to other places. And she recognized the faces from glass plates in some photos used by Belgian police, to document incoming immigrants. So even though there is no family connection, family discovery in her discovery, she was able to find, I don't know, 20 or so people, names of 20 or so people whose images are in this collection. So, and it's always whenever someone discovers someone's identity in the photo from this collection, it's always well, it's an amazing news. We're never sure what to do with this information, because people often think that when we have a name, it is easily possible to find the entire biography of someone, which is not always possible. But it's it brings much more life into this collection and these photographs.
Yeah, Glenn Kurtz, who wrote 3 Minutes in Poland, he talks about nameless faces and faceless names. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes you are able to, make those intersect so that you have names and faces together. Lisa, I wanted to ask you, this is the first time that you've published a book of photos, right?
As White Coat Press, yes, it is.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes.
And are you thinking maybe you'll do something else along these lines?
I'm looking at the block with Aaron in it, and yes, please. Yesterday I asked him if we might be able to do another book, and I certainly hope so. I'd also mention that it is our hope that people will come forward as this book gets out there and recognize people. And if so, we would love to be able to publish, some kind of, addendum to it that would just be print with some of that information, because if it would reveal more about the history and the identity of the people, I think that would be a really wonderful result.
Yeah, and at the end of this webinar, you'll have all the contact information. Mm-hmm. So. And you'll be able to look at the whole collection on the Brama Grodzka website also. I want to, before I look at other people's questions, Piotr, I think, I briefly mentioned that there are parallels between the two organizations, Yiddish Book Center and Brama Grodzka. Do you want to mention what some of those are? In addition to this idea of cultural rescue?
Well, that's the main, I think that's the main resemblance between the two organizations. I don't know, maybe you're much better person to judge the similarities between the two organizations.
One thing is that they both have these directors that started in a very grassroots way, from just an inner drive, and then created these organizations. So that to me seems like a parallel.
It is a parallel. I agree. Both are for sure driven, also because of this grand idea that appeared and then was developed and grown into something bigger. Aaron met with our director a couple of years ago. I think they actually, they were sitting exactly in the same place where I sit right now. So I'm like a living monument of their name.
Yeah, Aaron, what, you know, obviously the photos were extremely impressive, but what other things do you remember about your visit to Brama Grodzka?
Oh, Piotr's got it exactly. It was the spirit of the place. We're doing the same thing, and not only are we both drawn to the imperative of cultural preservation, but I think we both have a sense of the adventure of cultural preservation as well. It's really fun. You know, we go out and we look for things that have just been overlooked, that have been, in the case of the glass plates, that have been lying under a pile of rubbish for how many years, and suddenly someone sees it and realizes what's there, and then they take on enormous significance. That's the story of every book we've ever collected. You know, many were valued, others were thrown out, but the truth is we've saved over 1.5 million volumes at this point. No one had a clue that many books ever existed. And it's been startling, I think, for the rest of the world to see what was there and what had almost been lost. And it's been enormously gratifying for us to realize that, God, you really can do this. History, even when history is lost, it's still not exactly lost. You can still reclaim it. And that's very exciting.
Yeah, and you can also, as one person, you know, make a difference. I understand that there are many people working with you, like I know, but you know, you start something and then it can grow. So
yes, but it grows of its own accord. Did you ever read War and Peace? Remember, there's the scene when Napoleon's up on the top of the hill and one of the great battles is unfolding beneath him. And Tolstoy writes, Napoleon only thought he was running the battle standing on top of that hill. But the truth is, once you set it all in motion, things grow of their own accord. And people like Lisa and many others like her on our staff are people of breathtaking talent and extraordinary dedication, and they work 60 and 70 hours a week, and they really care enormously. So I am honored to work with such people. And Piotr, I'm really honored to have worked with you on this as well. I think it's great. We are, there's a great affinity between us, I think.
And that's another, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, you know, in the same way we digitized the books, what made this collaboration so fruitful and we were able to do it was the fact that you had conserved and digitized this collection. If those 2,700 glass plates were not digitized, we would still be working on this book for 10 or 15 years. And all of the research that went into it, it was just, it was such a fun collaboration because that commitment to what that rescue and collection represents was all there, just to be sort of set off in a new direction. So
I agree.
Again, it was wonderful.
At least I just want to say that when one deals with a culture that's almost thrown away, that's almost discarded, and you get a chance to save it, you have a responsibility to kind of go first class. You do it really well, and you make sure it's the best because those materials deserve it. And God only knows these plates waited long enough for this kind of attention and this kind of precision.
Well, you certainly gave them first-class treatment in this book. I mean, the quality of the paper and, you know, it's really beautiful. I think you did them justice. And to me, that's another, what you were talking about the dedication of the people. It's the same in Brama Grodzka. And I'm one of many people who has ancestors from Lublin, and you know, it's very heartwarming to us. It's not only what they do, you know, but it's how they do it and how much they care about it. Let me take a look at some of the questions from the audience. This is somebody is asking, how did you choose the cover picture? That must have been a very difficult choice. Can you shed some light into that, Lisa?
There was another picture that was on the cover and was presented. And it was a very nice picture. We use it as a big spread inside. But there just was something, as I mentioned to both Piotr and Aaron, the designer that just I felt wasn't as immediate and didn't convey. It was hard because there's so much to convey of what's inside. And there was something about the three women that just did it all, including the fact that there was a Yiddish newspaper. So I think we all were okay with that. It was a collective decision once we saw it.
So Erin is holding up the book without the cover, and then I'll hold it up. This is what it looks like with the cover. Somebody asked, can you please hold the book up so we can judge it by its cover? I like that. So somebody else asked, Piotr, I don't know if you know this, but was this technique of using glass plates typical in this period?
From what I understand, it was typical. It was a bit outdated, like more modern techniques started to appear in the world in the 1920s and in the 1930s. But it was still used by photographers. Like, I don't remember the exact name. I think it's the name of the technique is something like dry plate invented by Maddox. It was, first of all, it was efficient. It was extremely efficient. It was inexpensive, and that's why even such a photographer as Abraham Zilber Bear or whoever he was, and whatever his name was, who was not some, exquisite, expensive photographer. He might have, he was able, like, to afford to buy chemicals and glass plates to make his inexpensive photographs, thanks to this technique. So from what I understand, it was still a popular, a bit outdated, but still popular technique.
Yeah. Piotr, what I like about it though is that the plates themselves were shockingly fragile. It's not like Matthew Brady in the Civil War. These were very, very thin glass.
Thin and quite small.
What's that? I'm sorry. And the fragility of them is itself striking, because these could so easily have been lost. In my own foreword to the book, I point out how many people believe the Holocaust began with Kristallnacht in Germany in 1938, the night of broken glass. And to see these glass plates, these images of the world that existed before, having survived against all odds, like they should not have survived. They were way too fragile for that. And somehow they did. And it just like gives me goosebumps even to recall that and to think how these made it through somehow.
Yes, yes, I agree.
Somebody wants to see some of the inside pages, which brings me to something else I could ask you, Lisa. Some of the pages have a black background and some have a white background. And I'm curious about that decision, and, did you consider all white or all black? And,
When we started with the layouts, we had them all in white, no backgrounds, but there were conversations. And I think, again, this is where the fun collaboration that went on, Piotr, I think on weekends and evenings across time zones, where you came back and asked about the black borders, and we were, okay, yes, we're considering them. And then there was the question of where to put them. But it, again, was the evolution of this. First, the editing process to get it to where we all felt there were representative images across the collection, that we had found our darlings and made sure they were in there. And then with Piotr, there was back and forth about this. And I think we were very happy with the resolution in the end.
So someone asked about the ones who are not the darlings and how they can see them. And I want to say again that they are all online on the Brama Grodzka website. And at the end, and also if you're watching this live, in the follow-up email, you will get that link. So you can peruse all of them.
And then they can make their own book of the rest of them.
Yeah. Piotr, somebody is asking, were all the pictures from Lublin or from other areas in Poland as well?
Most of them were taken in Lublin, and actually a vast majority were taken in the staircase of the building where this photographer operated. Like, he had a tiny little corner in his staircase, and there he was taking pictures.
With a skylight, right? With a skylight,
with skylight above the staircase. Some of them were taken in the Lublin region, like in some tiny villages or small towns in the Lublin region, for unknown reasons. Like probably he was traveling, he was visiting places nearby to earn money. Like that's the only reason I can imagine, because his intention was not to document anything. Like he was not interested in documenting life. He was not interested in documenting buildings, architecture, nothing like that. Like he was following the opportunities.
I thought maybe a family would have said, "Oh, come to Nałęczów, this vacation place. We're going to be there, and you can take pictures of us." I don't know.
Yeah, and since Nałęczów was and still is a very popular resort near Lublin, you could have expected many vacationers, or however you pronounce this word, to be there and to buy your services, to pay for your services. So that was probably the case.
Somebody is asking about how we are pronouncing the name Lublin, and is used to saying Lublin, which I have heard a lot of like Americans say, but I don't know. Do you know?
Maybe Yiddish speakers say it, but I'm not positive. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Is that how you say it in Yiddish?
Lublin. Yeah, that's how I would say it. Yes.
Yeah. I'm only an intermediate Yiddish, so I don't know yet. So we have a question about the captions at the end of the book, and how do you know, what they refer to. So first of all, there are captions within the book. Not every picture is captioned, just some of them. And those are the English ones as you're going through the book. But the Polish ones are the ones that are at the end. And there's a little mini picture of the photograph and then the caption. Is that correct?
All of the photographs that are captioned in English are then repeated in the back as what we say thumbnails of that. So any captions that occur in English also occur in Polish. So they're exactly the same.
Piotr, somebody is asking about, you mentioned that poverty was depicted in some of these photos, but it seems like to be able to pay for a photograph would be kind of a luxury. So how do we know anything about how much this would have cost?
I don't think so. Actually, I think it was nothing. It was a few pennies probably for a photograph. Like, let's remember, we are not talking about Anatevka, like some 18th, 19th century shtetl in like whatever. Like, these were inexpensive materials. The photographer was inexpensive, so even poor people could have afford to pay for his services. And it's actually, it brings me to something I thought a minute ago, because we see poverty, but we also see like modernity, like in many photographs, you can notice people holding newspapers, either Yiddish newspapers or Polish newspapers. And newspapers, this is something that, like, I really like the press, historical Yiddish press. It is something that actually brought me into the Yiddish language. And like, I'm always like touched, I don't know, like moved by pre-war advertisement, things like that. And if you're like careful enough, you can see the content of the newspapers depicted in this collection. But I'm always shocked to some degree by the fact that, for example, in the 1920s, on first pages of newspapers, you could have seen, I don't know, advertisement of chewing gum or condoms, like such things. And when you can buy things like chewing gum or condoms, it means that you live in a modern society, modern world. It means that your thoughts and ideas are probably like those people were almost us, those depicted in the negatives, in glass plates. Like they almost had smartphones, like the basis was there, the fundamentals of our world was there. And this is something like striking and extremely, because this collection is so straightforward, like there is no depth there are no artsy techniques used by this photographer, but this is the main depth for me when I think about this collection. The fact that those people were almost us, like we can relate with them easily.
Yeah, that's a very touching phrase, that almost us. My Yiddish teacher has weighed in on the discussion. Yes, Lublin is the way you say it in Yiddish, confirming what Aaron said. So we have a question about, have any other photos by Zilber Bear come to light outside of this collection? And if so, are they stylistically similar?
I remember going through the archives of some institution. I don't remember, like archives of Montreal, I think. It was some kind of Jewish museum in Montreal or something like that. And I spotted a photograph that is for sure from our collection. Like it was made, it's a portrait of a lady, of a girl. And it was made, you can tell for 100% that it was made in the same staircase. The interesting thing is that we do not have this negative. Like the copy exists, the negative is not in our possession. So it looks exactly the same as other photographs by this photographer. And well, who knows how many of his photographs are actually around the world in family archives. They might have survived.
Somebody is asking about family photographs and how that was an important, that people would take family photographs in order to send to their relatives abroad. I'm curious about the balance between, you've got sports teams and political youth movement photos, you have family photos, you have individual portraits, you have pictures related to the yeshiva. What was the balance in the collection, and how did that, and what's the balance in the book?
I would say, you can back me up here or disagree. It's pretty representative in the book. I mean, there are a lot, we had to whittle it down in terms of group shots. The reason the portrait shots in the back are so, they're treated differently was very intentional to get as many of those portraits in. And the parks and things like that, Piotr, wouldn't you say it really is?
I would say that it covers most of the themes, most of the categories. Like, again, the vast majority of the photos in this collection are portraits. And of course, you can, the best way to do would be to publish a book with 2,700 photographs, but produce it, like it's not easy to make such a book. So I think it's a very nice representation of the themes and subjects and categories of the collection.
So for our last question, a couple of people have asked about the staircase, and how do you know, and does this staircase still exist in this building, and how do you know that that's the staircase? So
the staircase does not exist anymore, but it existed in 2010 when the renovation, because the building Rynek 4 building looked in 2010, interestingly enough, it looked exactly the same as it looked in 1939. It was not renovated for so many years. So when my colleagues, when people who discovered the collection went there, they were actually going through this staircase, the same staircase, and the skylight was still there. Unfortunately, it was redesigned. A private owner redesigned the building, but it's amazing. Like there are some in some photographs there are like details on walls. Like I'm not sure how to what's the term for it. Like decoration, like painted decoration on walls. And from what I understand, this decoration like existed there in 2010, but it was, you know, it was not some, I don't know, like piece of art or something like that. So it was, of course, redesigned and changed. But the building itself, it exists.
Yeah. So
it's like 100 meters or 200 meters from the place where I sit at the moment.
And you can have a coffee downstairs even.
Yes.
Right. But I think it's fortunate, of course, that they did the renovations, because that's how they found the glass plates in the attic. We have a lot more questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time for them. I want to thank our wonderful panelists, Aaron Lansky, Lisa Newman, and Piotr Nazaruk. Thank you so much. Thank you for making this book, for this collaboration. Hopefully it is the first of many between these two great organizations doing cultural rescue. I also want to thank our behind the scenes people, Agata Radkowska-Parka and Elizabeth Cardaropoli, for your, you know, we wouldn't have been able to do this without your support. And of course, the audience, thank you so much for being here, for your interest. And you will be able to, we're going to show you in a minute the ways that you can order the book, that you can see the rest of the collection. Here's the book. You can see the picture probably more clearly this way. You can see the rest of the collection. You can be in touch with us. And as Lisa said, if anybody recognizes someone, of course, please be in touch. We'll be giving you an email in a second. And both Brama Grodzka and the Yiddish Book Center have events online, so keep in touch with us for that too. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.